Hello and welcome to Five Alarm Task Force. If you're watching the video, glad to have you with us. Glad to be here with you. I'm your host, Steve Green. If you're listening to the audio, welcome back to this episode. And my guest today, as I mentioned earlier, is Captain James, goes by the nickname JP Childers. He started his fire service career in Illinois. Okay, I was wondering what Cairo. The fire department as paid on call in 1995. Started his EMS career in 1995 in Alexander County, Illinois. Became an EMT paramedic in 2000 and has kept that going to today. And Champaign, Illinois, since 2005. He's currently the A shift captain and acting training officer. And he's a member of the Illinois Fire Service Institute from 2012 till today. He is an academy instructor since 2012. He's academy battalion chief from 2015 to 2020, and an engine ops instructor from 2018 to the present. Captain, welcome to Five Alarm Task Force. It's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure glad we finally were able to make it happen.
All right, thanks, Steve. I appreciate being here. I'm really excited to talk with you and do this podcast. It's a exciting topic I think we have to talk about today, and looking forward to sharing it.
Right, and if you're listening, folks, and you heard on the audio, we're talking about night operations, night ops. And some of you are going to say, well, yeah, we do some training at night. I did a little training at night when I was in my two volunteer slight combo departments. But if you read Firehouse magazine and you read the December 2020 issue, Captain Childers wrote a really great article about night ops and why we need them and what we need to think about and concentrate on when we're planning them. So, Cap, let's take it right to you. You have all these, I've highlighted them in bright orange here in the magazine. But I think, let me ask you this. What drove you to decide to attack this topic?
Well, like I said in the article, fighting fire at night presents a wide range of challenges that we just don't see during the day. So we don't get to, if we don't let me preface it by saying this. If we don't prepare for these types of emergencies by drilling in low light environments, then we're not going to be ready when the bell rings. And we know most of our fires are between 10 p.m. and 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. when people are home asleep, most likely. And that's where our business is, but we don't train for it. And we don't train for it regularly, I think, because it's inconvenient. Even from the volunteer world to the career world, the guys don't want to get up and drill after they have supper at the firehouse. And in the volunteer world, you're asking a lot for guys to give up their evenings. You're already asking of that, but then you're asking them to stay later at night and do a bunch of physical labor or drill on a specific technique in the dark. And I understand that it asks a lot of people, but that's part of our job. And frankly, we're being irresponsible if we don't prepare for these events because of the dynamic of the nighttime environment. The risk to us, the risk to the civilians are increased. And if we don't prepare for it, we're just not ready.
That's a great point. And I think when we were talking on the phone a couple of weeks ago to set this up, I think I mentioned that one of my previous guests, Jimmy Partridge, who was with DC Fire, talked about when he was on there that he would rattle the guys at 9 o'clock in the evening and say, okay, we're going out in the truck. Oh, Lou, what do we have to go? Oh, come on, Lou, it's 9 o'clock. It's almost bedtime. I'm watching the game. They always had an excuse not to do it. But he said, okay, fine. If it's pitch black out, the power's out, and we have a call, you know where you're going to put that stick? You know how to raise that stick to avoid the lines? And if you've ever been to DC, it's right. It's like San Francisco. I mean, there are wires everywhere. San Francisco is brilliant and still working with and making their own wooden ladders just so that they don't have to deal with aluminum ladders and the danger of possible electrocution. So when I read the article, my discussion with Jimmy really hit home because thinking back, at least on the podcast, and then in my 8 years when I was active before I got hurt, we did a couple of drills at night, sure, but it wasn't anything to a great extent. It was like, let's go do this for a half hour, 45 minutes. And if everybody in the group does it, then we're clear and we'll go clean up and then we'll go have, burgers and from the grill. That's all well and good. But I know of at least 3 or 4 calls already. All happened late at night. And it was like a cluster meeting, to stay polite and clean, of people coming in the middle of the night and trying to shake the cobwebs out and prepare themselves for whatever this call was going to be. So I think that's what really attracted me to this article, because I saw the lack of good, strong night ops preparation in the departments.
I think culturally, Steve, that in the fire service, we like training to be a successful operation,
right,
if you will. And that means I get to go out and it makes me more self-confident. It, buoys my ego a little bit or something like that. But that's probably the worst kind of training you can have. I want people to be successful in training. At the same time, if training isn't expanding my comfort zone, if I'm not walking out of my comfort zone in practice, then I'm really not developing skill. I'm not getting better. I'm just like a robot repeating the same things over and over again. And I think when you throw in the night factor and all its perceived inconveniences for training, then all of a sudden you have just a revolt or something that we don't normally do. So if you think about training in the daylight, we can move faster. We identify hazards much more readily. Everybody is at the top of their game. You didn't just wake up and come out there. And we translate that into the fire ground at night. Well, the fire ground at night, we should slow down. We should move slower. We should, scan the building with our TIC and our flashlight, looking for those hazards that we can't normally see. You might miss the power line down in the backyard that fell onto the chain link fence. You didn't see it because the power line's black and it was dark. In the daylight, I probably see that most of the time. And if you're not practicing looking for those hazards in the low light environment, you're not operating safely. And the only way to prepare for it, the only way to develop those good habits is to do that work at night. The NFPA standard for firefighter 1 and 2 doesn't require any sort of night training as a part of the JPR. It asks you to operate lighting equipment. You can do that in the bay anytime you want. You know what I mean?
Sure.
When I was a young firefighter coming up in Illinois, we understood that the state fire marshal's office required us to do 2 night drills a year as part of their training requirement for a department. A lot of times that was, we're going to practice fighting LP fires, and they look pretty spectacular at night. And we march up there with a couple of hose lines. We reach up and pretend like we touch a valve and it all goes away. And we're like, hey, that's our night drill. Well, A, we're probably never going to fight a real LP fire like that. And B, it didn't prepare us for what we actually respond to. So at the Fire Service Academy, understanding that there's no straightforward at night, part of our development for a new firefighter is drilling at night. Of course, we do LP, but we do mock full-scale coordinated fire attacks in our burn buildings in that environment to coach them, train them, and help them understand the differences between the 2 environments, because they are different.
Oh, without a doubt. The only one that stands out of my mind was we had in the first department we had purchased a dual agent truck, only one in the county in North Carolina, and so we went up once it got certified and approved and everything. We took it up to the burn pit at the airport, and we lit off there at the pit, and then we're using the truck which had both foam and AFFF and Purple K. So a couple of the drivers and officers could get used to working with it there. And I was doing the video of it, and I want to bring some lights up there. And the chief said, no, you're not going to need them. It'll be bright enough. And, well, unfortunately it wasn't. Yeah, you could see the flames well, and you could see the white of the foam, but that was about it. And you could barely see the firefighters. standing wherever they were, a bunch near the truck itself or one of the other pieces of apparatus we had there. And I was just kind of glad I was off to the side because I don't know, there was something just a little spooky about the setup
Right, sure.
for me. But, again, I think because we weren't acclimated to practice outside, this was a big deal practice for us. Brand new apparatus, specialty piece. He specialized in it, that chief, because he was a specialist in flammable liquids and flammable metals fires. And we had production work in our district. We at the airport, we were second due on all alert 2s and 3s at the airport. It was right by the thing. And then we were primary on all facilities on the airport grounds. So I think, kind of working with them was kind of nice, but it was a different world. But we also had a lot of tankers on the interstate because we had a big depot nearby.
Sure.
And right across the street from the airport in our district in those days, it was one of the largest finished product gasoline tank farms in the country. And I never understood why they put those right across the street from airports in many major cities. We had it in Greensboro, Logan in Boston has it. Several others that I've flown into. It's always nice you're coming in and see all those gigantic.
So is it just easy to get the fuel to the airport for the
Maybe
jets,
that's it. Yeah, Philly has it. Philly's another one that's like
which
that.
came first, the airport or the tank farm?
Exactly. Let's ask the chicken or the egg. I'm not sure which one.
Right.
So we've touched a little bit on the fringes, but let's talk about specific problems that you mentioned. You bring up in the article. You have several headings, and all of them are. And it doesn't make any difference where you're located, folks. You can be down here where I am in South Florida. You can be where Cap is up in Chicago. You can be in Alaska, where we have some faithful listeners up there, originally from Philadelphia, at least one of them I know. You can be one of our listeners in the UK, in New Zealand, Australia, China. But all of these are going to apply to you if you take your head out of the helmet for a moment and trying to sit and open up your ears and say, listen, these are things I got to pay attention to because, we get calls at night. I just never thought about it other than running down to the station or getting out of the bunk and getting on the apparatus.
Sure.
So let's talk about some of those headings that you brought up and why they're so important, please.
Absolutely. Because, so far, like you said, we've been on the fringes of what the problem is. We talk about, night's different. Well, no kidding, because it's dark, and we haven't dove down into it. There are a few things that are really predictable about the night. That it's going to be harder to see things. But what about your apparatus placement? Do you have a unit with a light tower on it? Do you give them prime placement on the scene when usually they may be parked back a block out of the way? Do you consider getting that extra lighting going? Where do you put your ladder truck? We all say, the truck always gets the front of the building, but is that the optimum place depending on the structure and the conditions you have if you're operating in that environment? You mentioned the overhead lines earlier, and what can they get into if they're not able to see that? So we might want to, I'm not saying definitely you can't, because you can't say always and never in the fire service, right? You just can't.
Right.
I would never say that always put your light tower, prime placement at the fire ground at night. You have to do it. I would never say that, but you have to be aware that it may need a little bit more priority in spotting your apparatus for the firefight. You might, because once I brighten up the area, things might be better for me. You were talking about accidents on interstates just a few moments ago with tanker trucks and stuff at night. What does that mean for personnel operating in the nighttime environment? We know it's important to work in that shadow, but oncoming drivers, they may be blinded by your lights. They may not even see your personnel. So we need to work at building the discipline that I'm using all of my protective equipment, wearing my vest, operating in the shadow, not walking around the front bumper of the engine, right? Because those drivers, they don't care about you. And they may not see you. And so your scene control in that situation is far more important than it would be at the same scene during the day. Everything gets more difficult at night. You just, you turn the volume up to 10 from 5 simply by turning the lights out. When you talk about career versus volunteer, I came from Cairo, Illinois. I know it's spelled Cairo and everybody says that, but you pronounce it Cairo. I don't know why we did that. It's the extreme southern end of the state. That's my only excuse. Down there at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. And in our small paid-on-call department at night, you may get people. Other guys may have been at the bar all night already, or they're out with wives, girlfriends, what have you, other family events. What is going to be your staff response at night? Or, you were talking about, before we got on the show, we were talking about the guys who do the make do that started with the 5-Alarm Task Force podcast. And, we don't make excuses. We make do with what we have. But if you're a fire chief or you're a company officer, you have to be considering the fact that you may not get your normal full alarm response when you're trying to operate at night. Holiday season at night, Christmas parties, Thanksgiving dinner, meals, all these things impact your response in that world. You may say, how does that transition into the career arena? Well, that's simple. If we have a multiple alarm fire, we're not metropolitan, we're not urban, so we can't just keep calling engines and have an endless trough of people to pull from. We may not have adequate staffing on our multiple alarm companies that are coming from home at night when we call people back to work because it's at night, versus during the daytime, we would get a larger response typically. And so those things complicate everything we do, and that's predictable for us. Another thing that, if you think about it, that should be predictable for us is the higher likelihood of finding victims who have been incapacitated by the fire. Between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., a lot of people are asleep. A lot of people are in their bedrooms or on couches, maybe fell asleep watching their show at 10 o'clock at night, and, you had the fire start. And so we find victims more often at dwelling fires at night. Because if it was daytime, they hopefully realize they had a problem and they just self-extricate, right? So at night, sure, they may be completely unaware of the problem, and they may not be sleeping in normal areas. So you have to anticipate that need and then also plan for that need. Maybe you want to call the extra ambulance earlier if you're going to a multifamily or a home that's been broken up into several apartments. We have a lot of that around the U of I campus here. If you're going to those places at night, maybe you want to step it up earlier as opposed to waiting till you get there with your normal response and then find out, you've got 5 college students in here that were probably being a little bit irresponsible before the fire in the first place. You know how those guys are. Yeah. So all of those things place a greater demand on us. And there are some other problems that we have in the fire service at night. Wait till I get done paging somebody. Okay. One of the other problems that we have is during our response. I can tell you that during the middle of the day, we can drive over to Campus Town on a fire alarm response or whatever emergency it is, and generally speaking, traffic is normal. It's congested a little bit, but it's not as bad as it is at night. At nighttime, what can you expect from the motoring public in the middle of the night, especially after the bars close on campus? What can you expect from pedestrians at night? It makes our response more dangerous to that part of our response area. If you live in a rural area, are you aware of the changes in traffic patterns and things like that occur after dark? Those are things that, if you're a chauffeur, the engineer, whatever you call them on your apparatus, you have to consider that. What is the nightlife district like? At night when the bars close, when they start to let people out, what are we looking at seeing? We already know you can't trust the pedestrian's behavior, right? Or the other driver, but you may be dealing with more impaired drivers at that time. Water and weather. The weather changes at night, right? During the day, it could be 35 degrees here in Champaign today, but tonight, maybe it's 11 degrees. And so that impacts our operation from everything from pumps freezing up, our gear freezing up, our SCBAs freezing up. but maybe we didn't have that problem during the day, but now we've got to plan for it at night. How are you going to keep your people warm if you're going to be at a prolonged event? In terms of identifying your water sources, is that easy at night? Do your hydrants have reflectors on them, or do they not have reflectors on them? Does your engineer or chauffeur, do they understand where they can get water? Do you have access on a mobile data terminal or something like that to hydrant locations in your district if the hydrants aren't well marked? Pretty easy for us. You know, we are well watered. We have hydrants everywhere. Our entire response area, except for a couple areas, has decent water. So that becomes easier for us. But if you're in a rural situation, you may not have that, and you need to have some advanced knowledge of the area before you go out there in the middle of the night. You know, I'm out of water. Well, where am I going to get it?
Right.
you
right.
know?
You brought up something I just want to touch on, because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the great mutual aid program that the Midwest, the upper Midwest has. It's in Illinois and Wisconsin and up there. And I think if more the states in that are connected to each other did the same thing and knew that, like you said, most of us can't fall back on, we have 8 or 9 firehouses and we can have 3 more engines and 2 more trucks show up just at the drop of a push of the button on the radio. But a lot of companies don't have that, and especially suburban companies. But your area has some of the best mutual aid system. I think was it
Mavis.
Mavis,
Yeah,
right? Mavis, right?
It stands for the Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. And, Illinois is first in a few bad categories, like the state budget is the worst in the nation. California's gotten better than us. But we also have one of the most comprehensive mutual aid systems in the country, and that's fantastic. It enables us to respond to large-scale events and knowing what resources we can reach out and grab from other departments. It takes out the whole idea that if you were Fire Chief Steve Green and I needed your dual agent apparatus at my scene, it eliminates me trying to call you in the middle of the night and be like, hey, Chief, can I borrow that? We just call the Mavis Red Center and put out the request, and then the Mavis system's activated and it gets guys on the way. Our sister city, Urbana, we touch. You can't, if you're not from here, you can't really tell where you are, right? Between the cities sometimes. And we do auto aid with them. We routinely work with those guys at our events, at stuff on campus. We share campus responsibilities. So we always work well with those guys. In terms of calling for additional specialty resources, if you remember back in December, it was December, the tornado that hit the Amazon distribution center down in Edwardsville, Illinois. They activated Mavis Technical Rescue teams for that. And they had several teams there. They had EMS special alarm team units there. They had multiple fire departments there. Even St. Louis City came over, and that's an example of the system working the way it could. So I believe they were even working on a deployment when the tornado hit Murray, Kentucky, hit the candle factory down there. Guys from Carroll Fire Department, where I first started, they went over and were working in Murray, Kentucky. So yeah, it's a great system, and it takes out a lot of the barriers from, getting permission to use units, leave your area.
Sure.
All that's agreed upon ahead of time.
Sure.
And they pulled a good deal of money together as well from Illinois Terrorism Task Force, from FEMA, Department of Homeland Security. And so there were a lot of resources that got that specialty equipment in departments that ordinarily wouldn't have it, but then it was available for, Mavis responses.
Yeah, I think my first exposure to that was the tragic crash of the American Airlines plane at O'Hare, and just off the airport grounds, and yet the response from neighboring career and mostly volunteer departments around O'Hare. People say, well, Chicago, I mean, it's got to be all
right.
career. Well, no, exactly. But the fact is that they had an amazing response from career and volunteer departments in that area around O'Hare Airport that just came in and did whatever they could to help out the on-scene ARF teams at the airport. And when I saw that on the news, and then we read about it following up in the trades, I was just so amazed that for such a horrible tragedy, everybody simply put their shoulders back, and everybody from the area came in to help and do whatever they could. And it just shows our dedication in the job that we love to do, but also knowing that when you plan in advance for that thing that you hope never happens, but just in case it does, you're ready for it,
right?
Or as ready as you can be.
And all those collar communities up there, those burbs around the city, the majority of them all work well together. I know a lot of guys up there from different departments, like Cal City and the southeast side. All those guys run alarms together, and kind of like Champaign and Urbana, because the urban sprawl, you sometimes don't realize you went into another town. But it highlights our flexibility, and like you said, highlights the culture of our profession, that we want to do good work, we want to help. And MABUS was a way to formalize that response and remove some of the barriers that we experienced on a day-to-day basis on getting those resources. So it's a great thing. Hearing how other states don't have something like that, to me, it's very foreign. It's like, what you mean you can't just, don't you have MABUS? Well, what's MABUS? It's like, wow, it's the greatest thing for sharing those resources and get people there. We can't do our jobs well outside of urban departments without a MABUS type setup or mutual aid.
Right. Yeah.
So it's good stuff.
Our department in North Carolina, right outside of at that time, we were right outside the city of Greensboro. And for the first year and a half I was there, we had a contract with the city. But our chief had set up with numerous of the other volunteer departments in our area in that time, a box, what we call the box system, where it would be a mutual aid amongst the surrounding departments, and then we could expand out again. And each chief could set up his based on his station, his or her station number. They would, like, we were station 17 and 19, so we'd have box alarm 17, 12, which was our flammable liquids alarm.
All right.
And that would bring in 4 other stations automatically. One to cover our one that covered our two stations, and then the rest would come to the scene wherever that was. And either, because we had both hydrants and we had tankers, depending on what part of the district we were in. So he kind of set it up. It wasn't as big as MABUS is, but we knew that we knew that if we had those major calls, he already had the agreements arranged through the county. So it wasn't just the chief acting on his own. And we had a couple of calls where we did have, we had a tanker that cooked off one day, and we had to, bring our resources in. But again, it was like everybody worked together. We knew that these were the kind of things that we could expect. That's when we'd be called together. And for those specialty things, because we didn't have specialty teams back in those days. I mean, we did, you guys are young. You guys are young compared to me. So in the late or mid 70s when I started, there weren't any specialty teams, and you did the job that you were assigned with what you had. And if you didn't have it, then right. So I think that hasn't really changed that much today. I just think that sometimes we see personalities get in the way of mutual aid, and that's another whole separate article and separate story. But
you go on for hours about that.
Right. And, if we keep ourselves focused on the job that we have to do, rather than on personalities and they like a different team than I do kind of crap, we'll get the job done. We'll protect the people and property to the best of our abilities. And that's what we have to remember all the time.
Absolutely. Focus on the mission. We're on the same team after all.
Exactly. And we're all taking care of Mrs. Smith.
Yep.
That's the big lesson. All right. So we've covered a couple of the key areas. So let's talk now about let's say the remaining, 10, 15 minutes of this segment. Let's talk about now how we put into action night drills and your recommendations, how you do it, and how you've taught it as well, so that your crews are, they know that it's coming. It's not something that we're springing on them. It's something that's going to be part of their regular training, and you get them to do it without all the complaining. Oh, but chief, but cap, why do we? Okay, well, hear plenty of that, especially today with everybody looking at a phone or a tablet. You know,
Right. And I don't want to say, we all have those guys that we work with that will do anything they can to avoid something. So you're
Right.
not going to get rid of that. There's going to be complaining and things like that. So I got dual roles. So City of Champaign, as the acting training officer, I make sure the guys know that it's coming. And so that if guys want to do a shift trade or they want to take time off to avoid it, they do it ahead of time, and fine. You know what? If you don't want to be there, then you're going to be a drag on the training. And, culturally, we got to call it what it is. If a guy wants to be a slug, then go be a slug. Just don't be a slug and mess up my drill.
Right.
Then, you throw them a bit of a bone during the day. You shift things around schedule-wise. Maybe have a more relaxed day without some of the busy work items that pop up in the firehouse. And like, hey guys, run your calls, go get your workouts in. Make sure we got a meal planned earlier in the evening so it doesn't run late, because we're going to go do this night drill. The next thing you have to do after that is make sure that the training you're doing is functional and applicable to the job. If I take them out there and we do the LP fire, the traditional, march the 2 hose lines up and turn off the valve thing, there'll be mutiny, right? I'm not saying we don't need to practice that, but the training that we do needs to be no BS. It needs to be legitimate and applicable. Sometimes instructors go way off the deep end and they build drills that are unrunnable because they want to challenge a student, in a complex situation. And now you're losing buy-in at that point. If you want the buy-in, it's got to be job appropriate. It's got to be job applicable. And you got to be considerate of their basic human needs too, right? You can't like pop a night drill out on them right after they just had a big meal of spaghetti. That's not fair, and none of us would appreciate it. So letting people know early that, hey, this is coming, and they can plan accordingly. And being aware of their human needs is important, but the most important thing, I can't overstate it, that is that the training is applicable to the task that your department faces. If I go out there and I say that, we're going to do a shipboard fire and simulate a tanker on fire or something like that, a ship, well, it's completely not appropriate for us. We're landlocked. There's a couple of things they call rivers up here that I would call a creek. And we just don't have that, right? If I go out there and we burn us in a single family setup, building, a burn building, if I go out there and it's applicable, it uses our apparatus, our hose loads, our operating guidelines, our techniques, and it's no frills. If we just go out there and work on the basic skills and we get cleaned up and we get them back in service, that's where you get the buy-in. You lose all of that if you just try to build something unrealistic, or you try to introduce a brand new complex skill. That's not the place for it. If you want to introduce a complex skill that we want to try a different technique, whether it be hose handling or a rescue technique for a downed firefighter, you do that in the daytime when you can see. Once that student has developed that skill autonomy, once they've developed proficiency in it, now I can turn the lights out and put it into a night drill. But if I'm trying to introduce something new, I do it in a learning environment that's appropriate for what I'm asking them to do. I always have had a kind of a rub with instructors who want to, show you a skill one time and then change the circumstances that you apply it the next time. You're like, all right, JP, pull this line. I pull the line. It's like, okay, put on all your gear and now take the line in the fire. You're responsible for how to pull the line. Man, it takes some nerve to get frustrated with a student when they haven't developed that skill autonomy. And then you change the circumstances they're applying the skill. It takes a lot of nerve to get frustrated with that student, right? You shouldn't be upset with them. You should be upset with you because you're the one who set that student up to fail. And so you have to apply that to your night drills as well. So when we conduct a night drill, we look at where we are in our overall annual training plan. And we say, you know what, it'd be great if we did this and we threw the aerial ladder and we did, we do all these things. And it's like, whoa. We haven't done a night drill yet this year. We've been restricted because of COVID. We may not be able to set up the Super Bowl just yet. Maybe we should start with a nice preseason game first, to try to use that kind of analogy, and then we can work our way to it. Very much a crawl, walk, run type of scenario.
That just makes a lot of sense. Being a lifelong teacher, educator, is the fact that you wouldn't have a kid walk into the biology class, and even though I didn't teach general studies, I teach Jewish studies, but being in the classroom for 50 years is you have the kid come in and give them a test on material that you haven't covered in the class. You wouldn't do that if you're a decent teacher. You're not going to do that, and that holds true. And people, if you're a regular listener or viewer of the podcast, you know that we see the fire service as an educational service as well, and that we have an obligation as firefighters that, number one, to keep on learning. The day you stop learning is the day you should walk out of the department, because if you're not going to learn anymore, that we're done. That's what you have to open. And the next part of that is the next step is you have to be able to mentor. You have to pass that information on and share it with somebody who's maybe doesn't have the experience you do. Maybe you've only been there 2 years, but there's a probie coming in. You're still ahead of that probie. You've got more information. You've had more experience than that probie does. So be willing to share and understand where he or she is coming from, so that you don't again, as you just said, you don't set them up for failure just so you can beat the crap out of them. Right. That's not what teaching is about.
Right. And that's what makes some guys hate training so much that they will do things to avoid it. Oh, this training is bogus. Captain Childers, he's just set me up so he can make fun of me with the other guys. And culturally in the fire service, we have to make it okay to fail at training, because that's where I want you to mess up, right? That's where I want to make mistakes. And it's got to be okay. It's got to be normalized that the first guy out the gate, if he messes up a surge or a forcible entry event, good. I'm glad you messed that up, because now we can work on it. And I think instructors have to look at it from more of a facilitating or coaching or knowledge sharing, because firefighting, it is not a textbook sort of a job, even though I know the publishers, they do tons and tons of decent work in some cases and poor work in others, in my humble opinion. But we don't fight fires with that book. We're never going to roll up on the scene and get out our favorite firefighting text and look up how to do this, right? That's never going to happen. It's a hands-on, physical, practical skills job. And who are the best people in the world at teaching that, developing skill? Who are the best in the world? They're all around us. We just don't look at it from a fire service perspective. And that is
someone
coaches.
is at the front door.
And folks, we had a little break there. We had to take a pause for a couple of moments. So what we're going to do, we are going to take a regular break here. If you're watching the video, you're not going to see anything different happen. If you're listening to the audio and you're a regular listener, you know what's going to happen. We take a few moments, we give you a few ads and public service announcements, and then we're going to be right back with my guest, Captain J.P. Childers, as we're talking about night ops, how important they are for every department. Okay, keep your mind on that. And we're going to be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. My guest is Captain J.P. Childers, the training captain with the Champaign, Illinois Fire Department, where our good friend, Chief Gary Ludwig is there, a great supporter of the show, and one of the brilliant chiefs, I would say, that I've had the honor and privilege to meet and talk with. And like me, he's big on education. He's really big on firefighter health and wellness. And like I said, he's been here several times, and always great to have him. And that's why I was so glad that when I saw the article and said Champaign, wait a second, that's going to be Chief Gary. And sure enough, when the first email didn't go through because it got blocked by the system, I turned to the chief and sent him a quick email, and he was kind enough to share the phone number with me. So please give him our best regards when you see him. So we were talking now about the educational process, and we were kind of stressing that yes, it's training, but we're teaching at the same time, and how important this particular training is for every kind of department, no matter your department, because we all have night calls. Okay.
And the majority of our severe calls seem to occur at night.
Exactly.
So we have to practice for it. As we go forward and talk about how we train and prepare, I want to preface everything by saying I don't have any original ideas. Everything I'm sharing, I've either learned the hard way in trying to train firefighters and build training and going through trainings myself, or it was shown to be by a mentor or by instructors like Aaron Fields with the Nozzle Forward program, Jeff Shoup, from Cleveland, going down to County Fire Tactics, some of their programs like HROC. So my ideas are all stolen or borrowed and kind of reformulated to fit my needs, like every good fireman does. You make do,
Sure.
right? So you get the information and you make it work for you. And one of the things in the culture, our culture of education and fire service, is how we prepare our instructors. It seems like we do a lot of work on how to write lesson plans, teach from a lesson plan, use PowerPoint effectively and make sure the classroom's comfortable. But what we don't do is teach instructors how to develop practical skill. We could teach the steps 1 through 5 to hook up to a hydrant or whatever, but we don't do a good job of helping them coach a student through those problems. And the very best people in the world, that I said this earlier, are coaches that work with, insert sport here, whatever it is, those high-level coaches for wrestling, football, basketball, baseball. Those are the type of education techniques that we should apply to the fire ground, because it's a hands-on job. And like I said, I learned a lot of that stuff the hard way, and the rest of it's come from mentors and other instructors. So my mouth isn't a prayer book. I don't speak gospel or anything like that. And like I said, I got to give credit where credit is due for all those people who have formed my fire service life. And they certainly deserve it. And they'll tell you the same thing about the wisdom that they've gained. They've done it the hard way, or they learned from some very influential people, which comes back to the whole training and the idea of mentorship and sharing the knowledge that is gained so that somebody doesn't have to go through the pain of learning it the hard way.
Right.
And it definitely applies for how you structure and build your night operations training. You can't just, like we said earlier, you can't just build an unwinnable situation for them. You can't start off with the Super Bowl and expect a student or a fire company to excel at that. Maybe some guys are rock stars and they will, but the majority of guys, that are in the middle of our bell-shaped curve, they'll struggle with it and they'll lose buy-in and they'll just be frustrated by your training, and they'll try to avoid it or just survive it as opposed to learn and grow from it. I said earlier that training should make you feel uncomfortable because that's how you're growing. And I don't mean uncomfortable by making ridiculous fire loads in buildings or, going through 5 air bottles or something like that. That's not what I mean, but it should be challenging enough for you to grow your skill level. And that's kind of the point. But it should also be scaled to that student's skill level. If you have a guy that does not excel at forcible entry, well, then I don't need to give him fox locks and all this other stuff and make it an unwinnable event for them. I need to give them something that they can win.
Right.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think when you kind of reward, you're not giving them anything in particular, but when you reward that student or that firefighter, then what you've taught them stays with them because they feel they got something out of it. And there's some self-satisfaction, and that's education. And you look at the pedagogical studies and methodologies for teaching kids. When you think about it, and I've taught from preschool to high school and adults, and when you think about it, we all like to win at something and feel the satisfaction of completion, a positive completion like that. And if, as you said, you set up and recommend training not to beat the crap out of the firefighters, but to help them learn and grow. Yes, you might take them a little bit out of the comfort zone, but you're not throwing them into a sand pit and say, okay, let's see if you can get a rope rescue out to him before he gets swallowed up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. You have to develop skill, and that's got to be the approach. It's not like every time they go out to the drill ground, it's the final exam for certification and we're just going to teach. We have to facilitate the learning, and we have to give them an opportunity to practice skill to grow. And the student and the facilitator or instructor have to have the attitude that it is completely fine if you go out there and you struggle with using a rip pack, or you struggle with forcible entry, or you struggle on a search or a hose line deployment. It's fine. It's not an opportunity to pick on somebody. It's an opportunity for us to continue to grow and learn. And so we utilize the Fitz-Posner method a lot, where we spend a limited amount of time in the classroom or didactic portion, and then we spend about 70% of our time on the drill ground developing a functional skill. And then only 10% of the time do we spend doing the big Super Bowl type run, big coordinated fire attack. The rest of the time, we're coaching, we're building skill. And that's what I try to apply both at Champaign Fire Department, and I know that's what we use during IFSI's Fire Academy. After working out there since 2012, and I was one of those original, brand new instructors that thought, the harder it is, the better it is, and yell at a student, or it's okay to set them up in an unrentable scenario. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And it took some time watching how the skills developed, or in those cases didn't develop, and then doing some looking inward and saying, what am I doing wrong? Why are the students not performing? I mean, I showed him how come he's not doing it, or how come she's not being successful? Then I realized it was all about communication, and it was all about the practice. And I'm like, well, how do I do this? And that's when, I started learning from the guys like Aaron Fields and Jeff Shoup, Sammy Vega from the Fire Service Institute, all these people looking at it from a different perspective. And then you really dive down and you realize that I should be coaching. I shouldn't be lording something over the student. I should be coaching and developing their skill and giving them opportunities for correct practice. So until somebody has task autonomy, I shouldn't expect them to be able to apply the skill in another scenario. So if they can move a hose line straight down a hallway, until they can do that efficiently without me having to coach, I shouldn't ask them then to turn left and go up the stairs. I have to build each piece of the puzzle before I throw that extra expectation. It's no different training a career firefighter that's been on the job for 5-10 years. They're going to have a bigger foundation of skill already to start from. But if I'm introducing something new, or we haven't practiced something in a long time, I have to tailor the drill to what that person's skill level is, and then push it just a little bit, just ever so much, to expand it. And in order to be able to do that, as an instructor, I can't just be the guy holding the clipboard or the radio outside doing accountability. If I want to teach a drill or a skill, I better be able to perform it. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're not perfect, but I better be able to do the skill. Otherwise, I can't coach somebody in it, right?
Yeah,
I have to understand the technique. I have to be able to boil it down to its root. And the thing if you think about a night operation in terms of what you lose sense-wise. You lose vision. You're already losing your sense of touch and feel with your PPE. Your hearing is obstructed from your SCBA, from noises on the fire ground, and from all the radio chatter that's going on. And all of a sudden, it seems like it's a really complicated mess of things to do. And I would offer this theory. It's not mine, but I agree with it. There's no such thing as a complex fire. And for some people, I know some guys probably just who are listening, probably just like, what do you mean there's no complex situation? Of course there's complex situations, but hear me out. Anything that we look at and we say is complex is nothing more than basics layered on basics, layered on basics, layered on basics. And if you're brilliant in those basic steps, when you put the whole thing together, it looks more like a symphony rather than a cluster meeting, to keep it clean and appropriate. It looks more like a symphony than a cluster, a jumbled mess of what the heck just happened to all of us. So you do that by right practice, by getting buy-in, and you do it by providing opportunity for people to develop that skill. And once the skill is developed, now I can change the circumstances that we apply it in until we get to where we look like a symphony out there working. That's the goal. We very seldom will ever meet it, but we always have to be pursuing it.
Right. Well, we have to set up the target. That's, we can't practice without the target.
Right.
And we have to and I think that buy-in is that we present the topic to the crew in a positive way, not guess what I'm doing to you guys tonight.
It's gotta be, let's go have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
We're firemen. Let us go do fireman stuff.
We're going to do our amusement park.
Right.
That's what we're going to do. And let everybody have some fun and learn at the same time. I remember the drills, some of the really good drills we had in the volunteer department in Guilford County was because the captain and the chief made it fun for especially the new guys. They would joke around a little bit, but it was a serious learning potential that was part of that drill. And you kind of felt good to be there. You with your pals and your coworkers, and you're all there together to learn and do something. And some of them may have had a little more experience than this one, and others had more experience than that. But if you bring them together in a sense of the camaraderie as colleagues that we all work together, then you give them that buy-in, and
right.
and that's the key. And I think that makes a big difference. Is, as you said, between it's all right, 9 o'clock, everybody up and put your gear on. What are you talking about, Cap? Come on, we're going out. Then you lose them. That's it. Right. They'll be there physically, but mentally, the head's still back in the barn.
Yep, checked out and mad at you the whole time, right? And, fire service culture is a big, unwieldy beast. And if your department has a negative training culture, well, it takes a long time to turn a big ship. You may have that rudder turned all the way over and you're all ahead full. It's going to take a long time to turn that ship. And so I guess advice to any training officers out there that are working hard to try to do the right things. It's like, just keep going. You don't understand the seeds that you're planting. And for the story I want to relate really quickly here, I'm going to change the names to protect the guilty. There was a young fireman on a department that shall not be named, to protect the guilty, that, just came on shift, and the drill of the day, the company drill of the day, was supposed to be throwing ladders. And right at the time the drill was supposed to start, according to the shift roster, young firefighter grabs helmet and gloves and his boots and carries a ladder, off the engine, and puts it outside, and he's standing there waiting on everybody to show up. The guys kind of show up. The senior barn boss guy comes out there and he looks at the guy and he's like, "Hey, you just graduated academy." And it's like, "Well, yes, sir. Graduated Friday." It's like, "Oh, you throw ladders at academy?" "Yes, sir. Every day." "You don't need to do this drill." and then other guys filter out, and one guy's, oh, I've been here 20 whatever years. I don't need to put a ladder up. I know how to put a ladder up. And then everybody just kind of drifted away. And the young fireman's sitting there like, what just happened? The guy picks up the ladder, puts it back on the engine. And that's the worst possible thing you can do to a young firefighter. That young firefighter wants to learn, even if it's the most mundane thing for you as an officer, especially a training officer. You have to embrace that, because that is the development of a love of learning, and can be a career-long positive attribute that you develop in this young firefighter. You don't understand the seeds that you're planting sometimes until later on, and you start to see like, hey, why are you doing that? Oh, I learned it by watching you. Oh, okay. Good thing that was a good example for you that day, because sometimes I'm not the best example. And I remember, this is a different story, and it's a positive one. When I was a newly promoted lieutenant, first time being responsible for the apparatus and all the decision making, because when you're upgraded, you can kind of make some mistakes. Like, oh, you're just an engineer. It's okay. You'll learn from this and move on. And then they pin the bugle on your collar, and it's like, uh-oh, I better not make those same mistakes again. And I remember a young firefighter was on overtime at my station, and he comes in there and he looks at me, he's like, hey, Lou, what are we doing for drill today? I'm like, I hadn't even thought of it. Like, I had no idea what the drill was. Hey, Chief.
Speaking of the devil.
Yeah, we were just talking about you.
Okay. Oh, well, hi, Steve.
Hi, Chief. You can come on and say hello.
Okay. Oh, are you doing the, okay.
Good to see you, sir.
I'm sorry, man. You're doing a podcast?
Yeah, we're doing on night ops. No.
Podcast.
It's always good to see you, Chief.
Good seeing you too. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem at all.
Listen, I'll make the podcast at least.
Yeah,
there you go.
This is your house. You can interrupt if you want.
No, I'm just a temporary caretaker, so here to serve you all. So.
Oh, well, thanks.
And I'm going to talk to you when we get a chance.
Absolutely.
All right.
Oh,
yeah, you got to let the boss in when he wants in.
Exactly. Exactly.
But the young firefighter was pushing me as an officer. I haven't even thought of the day's plan yet, and here we are before shift change is even officially done at 0700. It was before then. He's like, "Hey, boss, what are we doing today?" I'm like, "Oh man, this guy's going to push me today." So it's like, "Okay, let's do something," And we threw a drill together and went through it. And I'm like, "Man, that's the way I should have that plan every single day when I come to work. I should work with our guys." But that was kind of a tale of two different experiences. And we have to encourage that learning, because our job environment's always changing. If we think it's not, just look at the UL and the NIST studies and everything that we're learning out there today. And in the city of Champaign, when I started, we had something on the order of 16 buildings that we would consider a mid to high rise, with standpipes and things like that. Now we have 44, and I just finished my 17th year in Champaign. And so our environment that we're working in is changing. So our preparation has to match the environment that we work in. And that ties back into how we prepare our firefighters in night drills. And if it's okay with you, Steve, let's talk about how we do it at the Fire Academy.
Sure.
And lay that structure out there, so the listeners can maybe, if they find something valuable, they can take it home and apply in their own entry-level training. So our academy runs 7 weeks at the Fire Service Institute. It's a great facility, first of all. If no one's ever looked it up, look them up. Just Google IFSI and they come right up. It's Firefighter Disney World. I tell you what, if you want to do it, they probably have something out there where you can go practice things and learn things. They have a great research department where they've done a lot of studies on cancer and contaminants and gear decon. Even our bailout kits, what's the best one, what's the best type of rope to use for that sort of thing. They've done a lot of great work out there, and I'm really proud and grateful that they gave me a chance to work there. But during that academy, during that 7 weeks, we have a couple of milestone events, and those are their night operation drills. And those occur at specific points during the academy. Week 4, week 5, we hit them with a large coordinated fire attack that incorporates everything that they've learned up to that point. It doesn't We don't, it's not a pop quiz. It's the skills that they've been developing for the first month of academy. So there's nothing in that drill that they haven't done yet. Not a single thing.
Right.
And that's how you keep it safe, right? By having that skill before you apply it. You don't twist it around and change things. The drills are challenging. There's a lot of moving pieces, but again, it's basics later on top of basics. And as long as they focus on one task, one step at a time, they're going to be successful in it. It's definitely a winnable event, but you could always see it in their eyes when we tap them out. You know, we have a dinner break. We come back from dinner. They hang out in the classroom. They're on duty shift, checks their equipment and puts their equipment on their PPE on the apparatus. They get their officer assignments. They know it's coming, right? There's no secret. You're like, we have you out here at 7 o'clock. We're just waiting on the sun to go all the way down so we can give you this night drill. They know it's coming and they're all nervous. And you tell them, like, guys and gals, you've done everything that's in this drill. Doesn't matter. They're still nervous because they know it's like taking a midterm, skills wise. And we roll them out the door, and it's a challenging fire for them, for sure, but it's a winnable fire for them as well. And then we give them a week to recover, and we practice some more of those skills if there are areas we identified that were weak. And then we come back in week 6, and we do a bigger night drill with more challenges in it. But again, it's things that they are prepared for. We don't, we're going to twist this up on this one just to challenge them more. Like, no, we give them tasks that they've practiced for. And that's how we build it. It is the low light environment. It's a high stress environment for them. You know, there's going to be multiple victims on our night drills. There's going to be multiple forcible entry challenges. There's going to be multiple fires in the building. We're going to have a lot of work to do, but it's safe because we've prepared them to do the work and because we have a good instructor to student ratio of 3 students for 1 instructor. So we've got safeties on all the floors of the burn building as well. And we're prepared for it. That's the reality of it. You were talking about education earlier, you know, in your teaching career, and how you would never give somebody a test that you didn't teach them the information on the test. Well, it's the same thing with our night drills.
How many people do you normally have in a class?
So just under 50.
Wow.
And we run that academy right now in spring and in fall, and there's other delivery models out there. There's a blended model that isn't academy per se, and they don't get to do the same things, but it's a blended certification program. They're looking at adding an additional academy because coming out of COVID, when everybody retracted for a while and delayed hiring and stuff like that because they were concerned about financial situations. Well, now that we're kind of coming, thank God, to the end of this pandemic, people are hiring in droves and they need their people trained. And, you know, I'm partial, but I feel like we do the best job in the state of Illinois. Obviously, we spend so much time developing skills. It's hard on the student. The classroom requirement is no different than any other certification program. You've got a lot of information to go through. You've got a lot of quizzes, tests, workbook assignments, line of duty death investigations that they conduct so they can learn from those events. You've got a lot of work to do, and it's heavily loaded on the front end of academy. So they have to work hard. But we spend so much time out on the drill ground that they don't get a lot of time in the textbook unless they do it on their own later. So it's a very challenging setup for them for sure. But the night drills themselves force them to operate in that environment, understand what it's like to everything from tying off the bail on a nozzle to tying off a gated Y or tying off a line on a structure or securing a ladder. They're learning how to do that in that low light environment. And invariably, they improve dramatically from the first time they were exposed to that to the second time that they were exposed to it. They're better for sure. And you know, you can apply the same thing in an annual department training plan where, you know, you build the skills and then gradually increase what's going on. And then you give them the big scrimmage and do it at night, do it in the dark. And it's okay. And it's okay if people struggle with it. Great. You identified areas that we can grow in later. You know, the expectation of everybody being perfect all the time just sets everybody up for failure.
Well, I think, again, that's a strong and positive educational model, because we know, every one of us knows what it's like to fail at doing something. It's failure that we made either by error or by, omission or commission, but we made it. And then when it comes back to bite us in the butt, we start thinking and go, well, what could I have done to have made it better? And I think that what you're offering to your in the academy is you're telling the guys and gals that, you know what, we're here to make you good firefighters. We're not here to beat you up. Yeah, there's going to be some strenuous work that we have to do. And, this is nothing new about climbing stairs, wearing your gear and stuff like that. But we're here so that when you go out on most of your calls, you're going to have I always compare to my kids with the two tightrope walkers. One who thinks he knows it so well, he can just walk across the wire, hands up. And the other one who says, I'm going to take the balance bar with me just to be sure. Well, the one with the bar is usually the one who makes it all the way across. Because it took one extra step to be more careful. And the other guy is the one who plants his face in the sawdust on the floor. So when you bring a student in and give them that, to let them know that you always have that balance bar. It's going to be something new, but we're here for you and with you. So we're going to be with you as you go through this and help you get through it. Then you set them at ease and their mind opens up to be a little bit more receptive. They're still going to have that little anxiety, but that's okay. That keeps them on their toes. And I think that's what you're presenting to them, is giving
exactly
an offer.
And like I said earlier, none of this is my, I didn't have an epiphany and come up with these great training ideas. They were all shared to me and shown to me by, my fire service mentors. And one of them that I was just thinking about when you were giving your analogy of the tightrope walkers is Captain Steve Williams of the Carroll Fire Department. He took I wasn't really a wayward teen, but I didn't have a lot of direction right after high school. And he took me under his wing. And, one of his things that he carried on was empowerment versus encroachment. When you're teaching somebody, you're trying to empower them. You're not trying to lord over them. You're not encroaching in their personal space, be it their ego or, their physical space either. And you're trying to empower people with knowledge, not brag about what knowledge you have. And the empowerment versus encroachment comes from Chief Benny Crane, retired out of the city of Chicago. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago, but he gave a great keynote address at IFSI's Fire College talking about that very thing, empowerment versus encroachment. And it's so important to have that attitude when you're coaching and helping somebody learn. I gotta be honest, there's been times I've been out on the drill ground at the Fire Service Institute, working with multiple departments from even different states, students from all over Illinois, of course, where those guys have showed me something like, hey, this is the way we do it back home in, wherever fire department. I'm like, oh, really? Let me see that. Do that one more time. No, let's try it. Let me get in there and get a rep at it. And you have to have that attitude. And as long as you carry that attitude, eventually you'll get the training culture turned for you for your favor.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the guests, I'm very lucky that a good number of the guests that I've had on here see themselves as mentors and sharing it. And they're instructors, John Dixon from Jersey, John Haywick, Andy Starnes with ticks. I mean, Andy is right now probably the go-to person on tick training in the fire service. And Sean Duffy and Nick Peppard, from Make Do. These guys are also instructors besides firefighters, and they all share that same passion. Joe DeVito, who's a captain, he's a captain with Fort Myers Beach fire, and he learned from Andy about ticks. Now he's teaching part of Andy's stuff out there, and he's like that little bird that that Andy took care of and taught him, and now Joe is out there doing the same thing and helping to cover other areas on tick training, but they do it with a positive passion. I guess that's the best way of saying it. They're not, just like you said, they're not there to, like when Sean does forcible entry, he's not there to make sure you miss the Halligan and hit somebody's hands instead. He's there to make sure that you do it as safe as possible. You do it, watch the follow through, watch how you do it. So you won't miss that end of the bar and you'll be able to hit it in, you'll pop that lock and you'll be done. And I think maybe what you're saying is that this generation, your generation, and guys like Nick and Sean and Andy and Joe and the two other Johns, I think that we're seeing is a culture generation now who really say, you know what, we didn't have this learning necessarily when we grew up, but we now training and we want to make the best firefighters we can. So we're going to do it the right way rather than just try to beat knowledge into somebody. Because,
Absolutely.
yeah. What's the old phrase? You can get more flies with honey than you can with vinegar.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's absolutely correct. And one of the things Aaron Field says all the time, I don't know where he got it from. Knowledge is power. That's
right.
True, but it's only powerful when you share it. And if you don't share it honestly and try to encourage the development of knowledge, if I just go out there and lord something over somebody or point out where they're weak or they're failing or whatever, I'm not sharing knowledge. I am abusing somebody.
Right.
If you want to take it to the extreme, that's abusing somebody, and it's not an effective way to get their performance to be better. And as a company officer now, and when I first became one, you start to realize my job's a lot less about me knowing every answer. It's a lot more about getting the maximum performance out of my company. And in order to do that, I have to be able to communicate. I have to be able to teach. And that approach is right on. You coach, you teach,
Right.
You provide opportunity to grow.
All right. So we're talking about that the first few weeks of the academy, they're doing their regular work, their regular class work, daytime stuff, learning the basics, taking them out, showing them what we're doing. And then it's finally you said week 4, I believe, is the first night ops.
Yep.
Okay.
It's either week 4 or 5, depends
Okay.
on how they have things scheduled. Sometimes we get some acquired structures, and those sometimes can be such a rare opportunity for
Sure.
us that we can go burn something like that down, and then we'll have to float the schedule somewhat in order to be able to maximize the training opportunity. So
Right.
usually
So-
week 4, week 5.
So in that first, whichever week it is, what is that first thing that you try to do with them in the night ops to get them to think nighttime? In other words, instead of, when we do the blackout mask with SCBA, when we're first training with SCBA and we do the blackouts, that's one thing. Cause there's always something at the end of that tunnel in training.
Right.
But nighttime on the emergency scene, again, let's say you don't have a light bar, a truck with an apparatus with a light tower on it. You only have the lights on the regular apparatus. So what's the first thing these kids are, pardon me, I know I'm calling them kids, they're all adults.
I do it too. And I'm
Yeah.
only 45 years old and I call them all
Yeah.
kids.
Well, I hit the 7-0 on Saturday. So
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. So, so what's that first thing you try to do that's going to give, because we all know, again, 2 things we don't like in the fire service. We don't like status quo and we
Mhm.
don't like change. So right now we're going to expose these kids to something new that they haven't really done yet. They've learned all the basic stuff like that. So what do you do basically, if depending on, I know other classes, other like that, what do you try to do that first opportunity of the first night ops with the academy kids?
So before we even get to the night drill, we explain to them the nuances of what they can expect. We're going to employ all your skills. Be prepared for that. Your writing assignment, your tool assignments. You can anticipate the tasks that you're going to be given, but you are capable of all of them. And it's okay to go slower and pay attention to your footing, pay attention to the hazard that you're looking for, and listen to your officer. We're not trying to create robots here, but we need you to be thinking firefighters. And here's the real challenge. We have on the apparatus at the Fire Service Institute, we have lighting, but we don't use it on the night drills. Everything's turned off, and that's not to create a dangerous situation. It's to force them to operate in that environment. And Steve, we coach them into understanding what it's going to be. But you know what Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan till they're hit in the mouth, right? And they think they have it figured out. And
Oh, yeah.
then we drop the alarm on them, and then they roll out the door, and it's like, uh-oh, you know, what is this? What's this all about? Because it is that significant, it's a significantly different environment than what they're accustomed to. And they learn real quick how to be flexible, you know, in the job assignments, because those things move, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces, and they learn how to anticipate their tasks. But most importantly, they get a feel for what that nighttime environment is. And it's always a joy for me seeing them go from that first night drill to completion of their second night drill and watch the difference in their performance level. And that alone, to me, identifies the difference in the two types of environments. They could do the same drill in the daylight and have no hiccups, do it perfect. But then I take that same drill and I put it at night, and now all of a sudden everybody loses their minds and forgets how to do stuff. So that alone shows, you know, the difference in the two operating environments and the importance of preparing for it. And then you add on top of that the fact that most of our fires occur at night anyway. You know, we're irresponsible if we don't train at night. We just are.
That's the key. There's probably, again, makes no difference what kind of a department you're with, but when your pager goes off or the bells go off at 2:10 in the morning, I don't care if you're Superman or you're Lex Luthor. The fact is, you've been asleep most likely, and when those bells go off, you turn and put your gear on robotically, but you're still not thinking at 100%. I think there was a study that showed that it takes us like nearly 3 minutes to acclimate from a sound sleep to acclimate to our immediate. Yeah, you can get around, but you're kind of stumbling your way there, and then it takes about 3 minutes to acclimate yourself.
Right.
You know, we don't necessarily have those 3 minutes on the fire ground.
No, especially if the alarm's right around the corner from the firehouse. You know, it's like, whoa, we're already here. I didn't have time to wake up. And I think that gets worse the further you go in your career, right? Like I said, I just finished 17 years here. I was on 10 years in Carroll as a paid on call guy before I got hired here. And so, you know, complacency and comfort is something that all of us have to actively fight against. So, you know, me going downstairs for an automatic fire alarm at a frat house on campus is different than the brand new guy sliding down the pole and jogging over to the apparatus to put his gear on, you know, on your fourth run of the night, that, you know, you're already in your head thinking they discharged a fire extinguisher and set it off, they were smoking pot, or somebody's intoxicated and pulled a fire alarm. That's just where your mind goes, because you always see that repetitively. So it's harder for you to get up and start thinking. You have to be disciplined enough to make the conscious choice. Nope, this thing's on fire. I have to expect fire when I arrive. I know this building because I've been here so many times. I know ladder access is going to be a problem. It's got a long setback. You know, how much hose are we going to need? You have to discipline yourself to think that way, you know, and that's something that all of us are challenged to do from time to time. And so, like you're saying, you know, you robotically do things, right? If I'm not training to that point in the dark in low ambient light conditions, then it's not going to happen for me when I actually have the alarm. If I'm not preparing for the conditions, then I'm just not going to be ready.
Right.
You don't want to look like one of your cluster meetings.
Right.
You know,
Right.
That's just the way it's going to happen for you.
So I think one of the another key point that you brought up is that the program has to be, for night ops to work, it's got to be a group plan. It can't just be one chief saying to the training officer, all right, do that on Tuesday night, and, you know, just get that out of the way so we can say we did it already. It takes coordination, and it takes the attitude that you just talked about, that we are teachers, we are instructors, and that's what we're there to. We're not trying to get rid of the riffraff. This is not a shake test to see who remains in the bucket. This is trying to take care of the people who are going to take care of the people in our community.
Right, right.
And-
And we're trying to build them to be the firefighters that we would want to see if we were in our own home and say we were trapped on our second floor and we see a guy or gal step off a piece of fire equipment. You want to be able to look out that window and say, thank God they're here, and not look out the window and go, oh God, we're in trouble. You want to be able to look at them and know that we've got a pretty good shot here because we got the right people here right now.
Yeah.
And there's only one way you do that. You do it by training. That's it.
Right, right. And what else would you? What kind of? Let's put it this way: what kind of drills? And again, for each department, it's going to be a little bit different. But what kind of drills would you recommend for the first couple of night ops training that a department, no matter its size, but it's something that it's part of what we should know anyway as a fire service? What would your recommendation be?
I think I'm an engine ops instructor, so some of the truckies won't like this. The fire goes as the first line goes. And if I can get proficient with getting that first line in the right place at the right time, that's a good starting point. If you have PPE use challenges already with members, for whatever reason, say you've got a bunch of junior members doing masking up drills in the dark outside to the point where you can mask up with your gloves on. You know, I'm a big proponent of masking up with gloves on already so that you can be prepared when you get off the fire apparatus. So if you have PPE issues, of course, address those first. But then I would start with hose line deployments and moving those lines into structure. I don't have to light a big fire to do that. You know, if I don't have access to a firefighter Disney World, like the Fire Service Institute, I can do these things out back of the firehouse with a few cones. I can go down to the hardware store and I can get some cheap OSB and some 2x4s, and I can build a hallway prop. I can build a T prop. I can do all these things where I don't have to have necessarily great access to a huge multifaceted facility. I can do it here. I can do it locally. I can move hose in the bay. You know, I can develop these skills in more unconventional methods, but I would start with the bare bones basic. And once I get those skills good, I add another layer of basics on top of it. You know, we'll move into search, we'll move into deploying those ladders, you know, we'll move into, you know, considering apparatus placement, we'll move into water supply. But I have to start, if my PPE use is good, if all my people are solid on masking up and PPE in low light, then I can move into, you know, the fire goes as the first line goes. I can move into that hose deployment. I can move into that search, but I have to have that building idea. And maybe for the first one, if we haven't done one in a long time, maybe we make the drill pretty simple with not a lot of complexity built into it, where, you know, it's just a straightforward line off, single family home, room and contents, you know, our quote unquote, what people like to say our bread and butter fire is, and move in, make a little fire attack, assess, see how things went, and then construct your next drill with the focus on helping with anywhere that somebody struggled or any place where we can improve a skill.
Right.
And that would be my basic approach to getting started.
Right. And I think we always have to remember that it never is, most calls are never quite what you first assess them to be as a firefighter. I'm not talking about the line officers and chiefs, but you say, oh, like, yeah, it's a room and contents, and that's all it is until there's a big
right?
comma after that's all it is, comma, until.
Right. Well, you know, the Mayday studies, they come out and say that most of our Maydays occur in the, you know, first couple minutes of the fire. And it's usually single family dwellings that we call, in quotation marks again, our bread and butter. And you wonder why it's happening there and not at the big box store as much, even though things happen there too. We're comfortable with 1,000 square foot ranch. We're really comfortable with that fire. Most fire departments are, because that's what they do most often. And so then your spidey senses aren't up. You get a little bit complacent, mistakes happen, and then you have your Mayday. Our recent Mayday back at the end of January, It was about a 900 square foot home with fire that started in the kitchen and extended throughout towards the Alpha side. That Mayday happened in the first 2 minutes after we were on scene. And so it's important to battle that complacency bugaboo, and you do that with training. You do that with practice, and the guys who were on our squad, and they were right on it when the member came out injured. They just flew and did exactly what they were supposed to do. They were on it. Everything worked because they were well trained.
Right.
And they knew what to do.
Yeah, we did a webinar last January on Mayday. Do you know what to do on the emergency scene? Because our automatic response is you hear on the radio Mayday and it's Bill, and you want to drop everything you do and go help rescue Bill, help him out, whatever the problem is. The problem is that you have Tom and Cindy on the roof venting, and you have another 2 firefighters with a hose line protecting them. Well, if you drop that hose line to that protection line, drop it to the ground because you want to go help Bill, what happens to the 2 firefighters on the roof?
Mm-hmm.
What happens about the people making entry now on the first floor? You can't just stop. Everybody just can't stop to run over to help. That's why we have RIT teams.
And you want to.
Exactly.
After going through it, you want to, because this is a guy that, I've known for 17 years, and the Maydays involving him. You have to consciously be disciplined enough to make the decision to continue the firefight, because the firefight doesn't stop then. Right. And our deputy chief of operations was on scene and just assumed the safety officer role. And as soon as he realized that the firefighter was being taken care of, yes, he was injured. Yes, it was an emergency situation, but there were people there. The paramedic unit was moving up. He was handled. You can hear him on the radio right away. The Mayday's handled, continue the firefight. When you just, that kind of shifts gears in your head right there to go in like, oh, okay, we know how to handle this. This is 900 square foot home with a fire in the kitchen. We know how to do this. Let's shift gears back. And, his leadership on the fire scene was critical for that, because that helped everybody reset. Okay, our down member is being taken care of. He's in the best possible hands that we have available, and we can go do the firefight because he's taken care of. Right. It just kind of gives you that mental reset. So, as bad as it was, our injured member is going to be okay. Great. They'll return to duty here next month, it looks like. So, as far as Maydays go, it couldn't have gone a whole lot better.
Exactly. Even last month, my municipality here, our fire department, which is great, ISO 1, and I listen to them very often. There's one station right down the street from the house, and I think within 10 days they had 2 Maydays. I had never heard one Mayday over the years from them, and so we're planning for a podcast, not another webinar, but a podcast with 2 of the best on that, which would be Chief John Vance and Chief Don Abbott of the Mayday Project. Perfect. Two really top line people to talk about the concept of Maydays and how frequent they are, and what they're coming from. And again, part of that's going to be training and discipline. And I think a lot of departments, again, back in my time, we didn't have Mayday call per se. You had to have somebody, because we didn't have radios. Basically, there were just 2 radios, one that was built into the apparatus and one for the officer. The rest of us had to listen for air horns. That was the way it was. But I think part of the training that we should incorporate, it may be being done already, is we incorporate how you should respond when there is a Mayday called on your scene. Not that you called it, but there's a Mayday called on your scene. How you need to, take that moment to take a breath before you drop everything to try to run away. And that should be part of that basic as well. Because listen, we're all friends, we're all family in the fire service. Basically, that's what we say. And so when one of us gets hurt, we all want to help. And that's a natural feeling. I mean, look, we're helping strangers. How can we not say we're going to help one of our own? But it has to be done in a professional manner because we're on an emergency scene. And I think,
Sure.
as long as we can instill that in our firefighters, yes, there are sometimes where things go a little bit wonky, but we're trained, in certain levels of wonkiness. And, as long as we follow our training and don't just react from the gut, we don't shoot from the hip, we act from what we know and learned, then everyone's going to be better off for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of training for it, and this is going to sound like I'm talking bad about the fire service, and I'm really not. It is worth mentioning, though, that in terms of preparing for Maydays, we talk about it a lot. We'll get a RIP pack out. We'll practice with it. We'll do firefighter CPR. We'll do those things like that. But we don't incorporate the Mayday into larger drills. And so that's definitely not where I would start with my night ops. But
Right.
eventually you work into having a simulated Mayday on that fire scene to where you shift gears, handle the Mayday, continue the firefight. So that it becomes like, I know what I have to do now. Oh, I'm the nozzleman. Oh man, who was that on the Mayday? So nope, I'm disciplined. I'm going to stay right here because I have to keep this hose line in place to protect this stairwell so we can get our guy out.
Right.
And you learn, you train, you build in that habit that you're going to continue the firefight. And we can borrow a page from, I know, don't make fun of me, we can borrow a page from our law enforcement brothers and sisters. When I was serving as a SWAT medic here in Champaign, assisting the SWAT team, one thing they did whenever we would go out and do active shooter type events with simunitions and things like that, they would always incorporate an officer down. Somewhere in there, you knew it was going to happen.
Right.
And the instructors, the facilitators would just walk up to an officer and be like, hey, you've been shot, lay down. And in that way, their SWAT team guys, they just knew what to do automatically. One guy steps over, provides cover, another couple guys move up to remove the injured member. And it's like, man, we should do that in the fire service. We go do we're doing a coordinated fire attack. We've practiced all our skills. Our skills are at a level where we can throw this at somebody, and then we should do it. We should say, hey, you're down. We're going to simulate a Mayday with you. This is what your problem is, your injury is, and let's go and simulate it. And I know NFPA 1403, I would never advocate doing anything unsafe. The standard is written the way it is because, unfortunately, instructors have killed students, and we've lost firefighters needlessly in training burns. But it is a different animal moving a human firefighter in all their PPE than it is grabbing the rescue Randy and dragging him out by his ankles, where it doesn't matter which way he bends around a corner or if you bounce his head off the stairs. But if you're dragging your brother, if you're dragging Steve out, and you're like, oh, Steve doesn't bend this way. Wow, Steve is really heavy with all this crap on, and you learn that, a couple of guys standing out front with the EMS bag, that's not a RIT team. That's an accident looking for a place to happen. You learn really quickly that you need to bring more resources to the table, even if that means you're calling an additional alarm. If you got all hands working, it's like, I need an additional alarm because I don't have anybody for RIT. And we also know that usually it's a company operating nearby that affect the rescue, but then that RIT team needs to be able to provide EMS care, maybe even to the rescuers, because you're going to potentially get injured while you're trying to remove your downed member. So we used to train more frequently on saving our own, if you will, but a couple guys got injured and they started calling it naming our own, and that had a bad cultural connotation for us. And then it's like, well, we can't, we have to be, more gentle because training gets dangerous. Again, build the drills where they can be executed in a safe manner. Don't overdo it. Crawl, walk, run, spend time developing the skill before you twist it around. You wouldn't take brand new guys and do the Denver drill right off the bat. Hey, we're going to do saving their own. Here's the Denver drill, do it. You would coach them on the right way, the right techniques, so you prevent injury to the members while they're doing the drill. But yeah, we can definitely borrow something from law enforcement, or at least how they do it in Champaign, where you do that officer down drill every time you go out and train. And you build in that habit. Like, yep, we're continuing the firefight. Those guys have our friend over there. He's being taken care of, and working on the communications piece. of it, saying, maintaining your accountability. If the officer on a hose line goes out, somebody needs to account for the nozzleman, right?
Sure.
Is he okay? What happened in there just now? And communicate that back out to command, like, hey, we have our nozzleman, we're good inside, and keep working. But there's always stuff that you can learn from. And like I said earlier, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And
Exactly.
a Mayday, with my recent experience with it, in the first 2 minutes of a fire, it's definitely a punch in the mouth.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Well, Cap, I can't thank you enough. This was all that I wanted and more. You really took us down that path, and I hope that every viewer, every listener take something away from this, and understand that education in the fire service is a positive endeavor that we do. It is not made to break a firefighter, is not made to talk somebody out of getting into this job that we love. It's about knowing as much as we can about what we do, being prepared when that punch towards the mouth starts flying towards us, how to react to it, and still try to stay as safe as possible. And I think we've covered the bases, like I said, just like I was hoping to. The article was terrific. And again, if you didn't read it, even though you've watched us or listened to this podcast with Captain Childers, I really urge you to go back to the December issue, December 2021 issue of Firehouse. Look for Captain Childers' article on night ops. We covered a lot of the topics there, but there's more in there for you that will help guide you. But there's no reason why you can't take away from this, from watching or listening to this podcast, to bring some of this to your department if you're not already doing something along that line. If you are, more power to you. I think it's great. And we all appreciate that because, look, as we just said a moment ago, we are family. And when one of us gets hurt or we lose a brother or sister, it hurts the whole family. And there's about 1.4 million of us in the country, in the U.S. here. And that's a big family. That's a big family. And everybody feels that twinge when something like that happens. So let's try to avoid the twinge and go in steps of preparation and education and positive outcomes. Because giving a rookie or probie the blood and guts scare story and stuff like that is not going to give that person comfort, him or her comfort in the choice that they made. And we're not saying you have to coddle them either, but you treat them as young adults, because that's what they are, most of them. And they've come because they feel this calling, because this is not a job that just anybody takes. We all got into it for some calling that hit us and then we said, yeah, I want to help. I want to help. And I know it's risky, but I want to help. And we owe it to ourselves, our comrades and colleagues that we work with day by day, call by call, to be at our very best, as close to 100% as we can. And what we discussed today with Captain Childers about night ops is going to help take you and your department down that road. Again, it doesn't make any difference whether you have IFSI capabilities or not. You can make, I've seen people build cardboard cartons and make a tunnel out of some cartons and do a drill in that. So if you can be innovative and you're a thinker, and you know what, if you're the training officer, there are only a couple of thousand of you out in the country. It's not like you have nobody else to turn to. You have great trades. You have the internet now where you can contact people. And I'm going to get the captain's contacts in just a minute on social media. But you have a plethora of resources available to you. Don't think that reaching out to somebody else is a sign of weakness. It's actually the opposite. Reaching out for somebody else to help you as you're trying to help somebody is actually showing what a professional you are and you can be by knowing what your limits are and how to reach out to help somebody else. So, Cap, so let's, are you on Twitter?
I am.
I caught you, huh?
Well, no, I'm trying to get my, oh, there we go. I want to make sure I have my Twitter handle right because I observe a lot, but I don't often tweet things out. And it's just JP Childers.
Okay, JP Childers. And are you on Instagram?
Nope, I am
Nope.
on Facebook, and I'm James Childers on Facebook.
Okay. Facebook, it's James Childers.
I'm not that digitally connected.
That's okay. That's all right. If they want to find you, they're going to find you. That's for sure. But
Yep.
Again, our sincere thanks for your time and effort. I know took us a little. We had a little detour on the scheduling, but as I said to the captain, because he got pulled over for an extra shift, I said, "Hey, that's just the nature of the beast."
Yep, that's the fire service.
Having
Gotta
been
be,
there, I know you have to be able to float.
Semper Gumby is what we say at the fire academy. It means
Yeah.
always flexible.
Always flexible. That's great.
You got to maintain that.
All right, so folks, if you're watching the video, thank you for joining us. This will be the end of the video. If you're listening to the audio, yeah, you know what? You know what's going to happen again. We're going to take a little break with a few public service announcements, then we'll be back with the rest of the show. But thank you all for tuning in. Again, our sincere thanks to Captain James Childers from Champaign, Illinois Fire Department. And we thank Chief Gary Ludwig for stopping by and just waving and saying hello. We always love to have him on the show as well. Thank you for tuning in. As always, stay safe and stay well. And we'll be back soon with another episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.